Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be talking about healers in the war within beta. We'll talk about the current state of healers. Again, anything can and will change, and I'll also talk about what makes healer meta. What are the parameters? Because a lot of people are making tier lists. There's just a lot of moving parts even at this stage of World of Warcraft development, and on top of that we'll talk about some of the issues that are happening in terms of balancing specifically Mythiclus content, the issues that are currently there, and maybe how you could solve them. Again, I really want to know your opinion. This is a discussion video, so let's go and get started. So let's talk about the current state of healers in the war within beta. Now keep in mind, anything can change. I'm not going to talk about what the meta healers are going to be because they're basically changing every single week, and Blizzard is tuning the underperforming specs every single week. For example, a couple of builds ago, Druid received some significant buffs to its hero talents in terms of Wildstalker and Keeper of the Grove. For majority of my beta testing, Druid in my eyes was undertuned. If you were doing Mythiclus content, you definitely felt the loss of Adaptive Swarm. Adaptive Swarm is no longer there. You also didn't have the Dragonfly tier set. Now, with the changes to the hero talents, the buffs to the hero talents, we're talking about some massive buffs. You can definitely feel the improvement in Druid, and I think Druid has catapulted itself closer to the top because of what happened a couple of weeks ago. And in a very similar way, in this week we saw Oracle for Priest being buffed again in a significant way. Blizzard is trying to buff these specs that seemed somewhat undertuned or underplayed or underperforming, and they're buffing them. They're trying to bring everyone closer in line, and I know there's still quite a few issues. I know there's going to be a lot of priests who are unhappy about the talent trees. There's a lot of 2-point talents that should be 1 point. Maybe there should be some kind of reordering happening. And I know also for a fact that a lot of priests are scared about the fact that Oracle is getting buffed because they don't really enjoy the gameplay that Oracle provides, which in my opinion is perfectly valid because Oracle... Again, let me know, guys, do you enjoy Oracle as a priest in the war within beta? But I'm trying to say that over the last couple of weeks, Blizzard has definitely identified certain specs and classes that were underperforming, and they're buffing them specifically through hero talents. But does this mean that the balance is perfect? Absolutely not. There's still certain classes that need to be addressed, or some of the issues that need to be addressed. I'm still holding on to the hope that Blizzard is going to look at the preservation of Evoker range limitations, but honestly that hope is dying out very quickly. And if you look at the nerfs to Holy Paladin, specifically this week, they nerfed Holy Paladin Holy Shock, they nerfed the Word of Glory, and that is a little bit of a cause for concern because the rework for Holy Paladin in the War Within has been pretty good. And the fact that they're kind of going backwards, Holy Shock and Word of Glory should feel significant in order for Holy Paladin to retain its niche. If Blizzard is going to start nerfing them even further, I will definitely keep my ear to the ground in terms of how they're approaching balancing for Holy Paladin, because so far the rework has been good, but they're kind of backtracking on it a little bit. And for all the other healers that I didn't mention, that is specifically because I think they're in a decent spot right now. I played all the healers, I had a lot of fun, specifically in Mythiclus content, and honestly, again, we talked about the fact that Druid was underperforming. They got buffed in the last couple of builds. Now, Priest is getting buffs. I'm not saying it's going to fix all the Priest issues, but I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks, Blizzard is going to have some targeted buffs that will help a lot of these classes. So let's assume that Blizzard is going to fix most of the balancing issues in the next couple of builds. What is actually going to make healers meta? This is the most frequent question that get asked every single day. What is the best healer? And it is such a loaded question, and I know why people are really scared about this. I think that meta chasing has become such a big deal over the last couple of expansions, and I know for a fact majority of the people who ask who the best healer is going to be, they're not even looking to push the highest content or try to get like rank 1 titles. They're just looking to play a healer and get invited, because I know most of the players don't have the luxury of having a set group to push Mythiclus or do Mythiclus with. Most players out there are pugging. Most players are sitting in that looking for group queue and trying to get invited, and if they don't play a good class, they're going to spend longer time, and they don't want that. And I think this kind of mentality has really grown over the last couple of expansions, and it's the community perception, the trickling down of meta from the top end players to like weekly keys. There's a lot of issues right now, but let's talk about what actually makes a healer meta and why it is so hard to say which healer is going to be SD right now. First of all, a lot of the times the best healers are going to be the healers that fit into that 5-man comp in a really nice way in terms of providing raid buffs, in terms of you need to know what is the best tank, what are the best DPS. And then you look kind of, what are we missing in terms of utility? What are we missing in terms of raid buffs? What healer is going to be great? And this is why when people are talking about what healer is going to be S tier, you have to assume that you know what the best Mythic Plus comp is going to be, and that is very, very hard. So just to back up my point a little bit, this is Dragonflight Season 4 Rank 1 title spec representation. You can see EU and US, and again, the representation in here, you can see the god comp or the classes or the specs that are doing really well. This is the highest content in the world. Why does it matter for you? Because this type of meta trickles down in your weekly keys, which is a big issue with community perception, which is very, very hard to solve. For example, in terms of healers, you can see Resto Druid has the highest representation by a mile. Does that mean Resto Druid is miles ahead of every other healer? Not necessarily, but if you look at the 5-man comp that is very popular in terms of Vengeance, Demon Hunter, Shadow Priest, Augmentation, and the Mage, you might be looking at this and like, what am I missing? That is raid buff in terms of Mark of the Wild. Mark of the Wild is extremely powerful buff to provide to your group, and a lot of the groups who are looking to push content, even in the War Within, will most likely be looking for Mark of the Wild. Whether that's going to be coming from a Guardian Druid, Feral Druid, Balance Druid, or Resto Druid, it really depends on tuning. And this kind of brings me to the problem of Mythic Plus balancing. And a lot of people have kind of talked about this. I've been getting a lot of these suggestions in my chat almost every single day. Should they disable raid buffs and should they disable racials in Mythic Plus content specifically, so you would have a more or less restrictive options? For example, we talked about Mark of the Wild. We talked about the fact that most likely in the War Within, as long as Druid or one spec of Druid is doing well, it might be brought in some of these highest Mythic Plus keys because Mark of the Wild is such a potent raid buff. Should that exist in Mythic Plus content? It's not that bad if it exists in raiding content because you have 20 players in Mythic raiding and it's a lot easier to min-max your raid buffs versus something like 5-man content where you obviously only have 5 people. So let me know how you feel about that suggestion. I know every idea has pros and cons, but honestly anything that makes balancing easier is worth considering. But just to quickly iterate over some of the parameters that I consider to be important when I'm looking at healer and looking whether they're going to be strong or whether they're going to be meta. In no particular order, obviously the healer needs to pump. The healer needs to be able to meet HPS checks, and if they can provide a decent amount of damage, that's a plus. Healer damage has been overvalued for the last couple of expansions, and I know why, because in Shadowlands, healer damage was extremely important, and I think people still have that PTSD type of thing where healer's damage is going to determine whether they're going to be meta or not. Over the last couple of expansions in terms of Dragonflight, and it's looking like that in the War Within, healer damage is not really important until you reach a really, really high point or pushing the highest keys in the world. Healer damage is highly overrated. You only account for a small percentage of the total group's DPS. And I've actually seen healers who focus too much on damage to the detriment of the group's survivability. There is a thin line between actually helping a group and providing damage in your downtime versus actually keeping people in danger. Unless Blizzard is going to do a complete change of heart and buff healer damage by a significant way, healer damage is extremely overrated. Just like in Dragonflight, Mythic Plus in the War Within is looking to be focusing around survivability, at least based on my testing so far. Can we survive this key? And if we can survive this, we probably will time it. So therefore, survivability, defensives, meeting HPS checks is going to be important. But going back to my point, healer needs to pump in terms of being able to meet healing checks, and also any added damage is added bonus. The next thing we talk about what makes healer strong in Mythic Plus content is going to be utility and defensives. We talked about the value of defensives in Dragonflight, and I think that kind of mentality is going to follow in the War Within. We also have to talk about the fact that tanks were nerfed, so you need to focus on tanks a little bit more, which kind of probably means that Augmentation Evoker is also going to rise in value. I don't want to talk about Augmentation because I could make a separate video about the impact that Augmentation has had in terms of Mythic Plus balancing or balancing in general, but I don't want to ramble on about this. Utility can be important, but it depends on the type of utility you provide and how it fits into that meta 5-man group. The biggest misconception that I've seen is that utility is going to carry your class no matter what, which is absolutely not true. There's been multiple seasons or multiple examples I can give you. For example, a funny anecdote is that at the start of Dragonflight in early seasons, Mistweaver wasn't doing all that great, and a lot of people were saying, hey, Mistweaver is not doing that great in Mythic Plus because they don't have good utility. They don't have a lot of things that they bring to the table. And then in the later seasons of Dragonflight, when Mistweaver got buffed multiple times and was pumping, people were like, yeah, Mistweaver is great in Mythic Plus because the utility that they provide is really, really fantastic. So basically, as long as your class can pump, people will find good things to say about them. So a good utility of a healer is not going to solely carry them in Mythic Plus meta unless they have good numbers to back it up. And the last thing that in my opinion makes a healer meta or really strong in Mythic Plus content is going to be raid buffs. And this is controversial because we talked about this earlier in the video. We talked about the fact why Resto Druid is so dominant in Dragonflight Season 4, and that is partly because of the fact that they provide Mark of the Wild, and no other Druid specs were doing all that well. So if you look at some of the classes that provide really strong raid buffs, as long as one of the specs are doing well in terms of providing damage and healing, survivability, utility, depending on which role, you can almost always assume that they probably have a decent chance of being included or being meta in a Mythic Plus season. So this kind of concludes my video in terms of some of the requirements that I consider to be important for healers to become meta or any class to become meta. We talked about pumping, we talked about damage and healing, we talked about defensives, we talked about utility, we talked about raid buffs and the issues that they provide right now. We kind of covered the augmentation of Evoker a little bit, but I also want to talk about the fact that why am I covering the top 0.1%? Why am I looking at the graphs here? Because most of that meta trickles down in lower content, and community perception is absolutely toxic because a lot of the times people will not invite you in a +5 or +10 unless you're playing a meta class, which is honestly wrong. Is there a really good solution to this? Honestly, not really. You can run your own keys and push your own keys. You can join a guild, you can try and make friends, you can try and make an organized Mythic Plus push group, but those things are extremely hard. I've seen people who are pushing rank 1 titles as solo players, and those type of players will most likely be pushed into playing a meta spec, because if you're trying to get rank 1 title as a solo player, if you don't play a meta spec, you will spend most of your time in looking for group, which might be fine for certain players or it might be an absolute deal breaker for others. What I'm trying to say here is that your main choice is going to depend on the type of player you are. Maybe you're someone who's pushing the highest content in the world. Maybe you're someone who's pugging content. Maybe you're someone who's doing weekly keys. In my personal experience, I play all the healers and I enjoy most of them. I have played certain healers because the guild asked me in order to provide raid buffs, in order to fill in certain slots, and I really didn't enjoy my time, and honestly that's the best way to cancel your subscription because you don't want to log in. So from now on I'm much more selective about which healers I want to main, which healers I want to spend most of my time, which healers I want to get good at. I also kind of want to come back to the point in terms of some of the best healers that are using the highest keys in the world might not actually translate in the same way when doing those weekly pug keys. For example, in Dragonflight, Resto Shaman is not viewed as the best healer when it comes to the highest keys in the world. Resto Druid has that throne, but if you're doing weekly keys and you're not sold about a pug weekly key, you're not sure if the people are going to interrupt, if they're going to stun, if they're going to use defensives, you could probably say the Resto Shaman provides so much to the group that it can really kind of help carry the group. So I actually think there's a difference in terms of power levels of healers when it comes to the highest keys in the world, where you have an organized group, you're trying to min-max your raid buffs, and then pug weekly keys. So this is why I think when people ask me what is the best healer, what is going to be the S tier healer in the War Within, there is literally layers to this question in terms of, are you pushing the highest keys in the world? Are you looking for a weekly key in a pug group? At the end of the day, if you're looking for a weekly key in a pug group, play whichever healer you like the most, because that is going to be the best value for your subscription. And if you want to know right now who's going to be the best healer in the War Within, who's going to be invited in all of these highest keys in the world, it is extremely hard to know, because healer is going to be considered meta as long as it can slot into that 5-man group in a nice way, min-max raid buffs, min-max utility. And that requires you to know what is going to be the best tank and what is going to be the best DPS, which can change on a weekly basis. But guys, let me know how you feel about this video. Let me know which healer you're going to main, and let me know, are you going to main a healer that is going to be meta, or are you sticking with the healer that you enjoy?